So, guess what? A couple days ago was March 31st, and I went out and I bought the latest and what I hear the last Star Wars film in the Skywalker saga, The Rise of Skywalker. Bought it on Blu-ray. This is a momentous occasion because this might be the last Star Wars film that I buy. And I'm not saying that I'm no longer a Star Wars fan. Those of you who know me, who went to school with me and went to college with me, you know that I'm a pretty dedicated Star Wars fan. Disney has made that kind of difficult in the last few years, but it's not all Disney. I mean, I'm closer to 40 than I am 30, and things change. I grow out of things that I was into as a kid. And nostalgia. Let's just face it, doesn't feel the same now as it did even 5 years ago. But this was probably the first Star Wars film, believe it or not, that I was contemplating not buying. It just wasn't a great film, and I pretty much have thought that for the last 4 years, really. The only one of the Disney Star Wars films that I really got into was The Force Awakens. And despite all of the criticisms about that being a rehash of A New Hope and not having a lot of original ideas, it actually did have quite a few original ideas. J.J. Abrams, with that film, I thought, was really taking it in an interesting direction. Now, whether or not he would have actually delivered on those had he continued to do 8 and then 9, I don't know. But regardless, it was very obvious when Rian Johnson came on and did The Last Jedi that he wasn't really interested in going in those directions, which is so weird when the series was still owned by Lucas. Even though Lucas technically didn't direct every single one of the original 6 films, he still was very much a part of the storytelling process. And it was very clear that there was a clear vision for where the story was going. And with the sequels, with the Disney films, not so much. So The Last Jedi, it wasn't even something that I was in denial in. I came out of that theater. My brother Glenn and I both went opening day for The Last Jedi. And I looked at him and I said, I don't think I really like that. It wasn't just that, Rian Johnson didn't do any of the things I wanted him to do, nothing like that, because I'm a mild Star Wars fan. I don't sit there and conjure up theories. It's fun to listen to what people think, but most of the time, the filmmakers are going to do what they want to do. Their job is to tell a good movie, not necessarily to please every fan. So I didn't care what Rian Johnson did as long as it was exciting, and that's kind of why I was conflicted with The Last Jedi. It was the first Star Wars film where I wasn't really dazzled by anything that was going on. I didn't think the story was that interesting. I didn't really find any of the new characters that interesting. I didn't like the fact that there were so many things they added to it when they had already established some really great characters in Force Awakens. And The Rise of Skywalker has pretty much a lot of the same issues, where there's just so many different characters added in, so many unnecessary plot elements. Rise of Skywalker is really, even The Last Jedi, I can remember what the story was about. I didn't really like it, but I remember it. Rise of Skywalker, I had a really hard time, even now, after a fresh rewatch of it, kind of understanding what was going on, other than the Emperor's back, and they have to stop the Emperor. There's just so many things going on, and it's such a big movie. It made me feel like I was watching one of those Pirates of the Caribbean films. A lot of great effects in those films, a lot of stuff going on. I don't know what those movies are about. Were they entertaining? Yes. But Star Wars, for the longest time, and this includes The Force Awakens, was more than just a big blockbuster. This is a very fascinating franchise. For me, at least, it's because for a lot of these legacy franchises, most franchises that have lasted this long don't continue the same story. At some point, things change, and you get a reboot, you get a retelling, you get a recasting. One that really comes to mind is James Bond. I think they're about to bring out Bond 25. James Bond, at least with the current chronology of the films, started in 1962 with Dr. No, and since then I believe it's gone through 6 actors to play one character. The series has been rebooted pretty much every time a new actor takes the mantle of James Bond. Storylines have been rehashed. Again, it's been rebooted. There's no continuity. Villains that appear in one film look completely different in other films. It's all over the map. I'm not going to say Star Wars is perfect, but I'm going to say, as far as I know, Even though they do recycle ideas, it's three generations of the Skywalker family, which is why Disney has dubbed it the Skywalker saga. So it's really awesome that we finally got to see all 9 films, something that I didn't think I'd ever see. Because Lucas, back in 2005, when he finished Episode 3, he just said, well, that was it. The story of Anakin Skywalker had been told from beginning to end, and that made sense. To me, the way I look at the Star Wars films, especially if you're new to the series, if you are just kind of curious to see what all the hype's about and you want to kind of figure what it's about, all you really need are the original 3 films: Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. Anything after that is just, if you're curious to see what happens before or after, then check out the extra films, because I don't think they're bad. There's varying levels of quality with Star Wars now that there's, well, actually 11 live action films, not to mention all the TV series and stuff. It's really Star Trek now, isn't it? I mean, it used to be just the 3 films, and then you had novels and comic books, but Star Trek had all these different series going on at the same times, plus movies from 2 different generations of casts. So it's basically Star Trek now, which is disheartening. It's been diluted quite a bit. And what I used to do, I don't do it so much anymore, because I'm very much a digital guy now. Physical medium, while it's nice, does take up a lot of room. So basically, I've been trying to build up my music library, my movie library on digital now, and not really hoarding as many physical discs of everything. I don't know if you can see behind me, but whoa, this is weird. Yeah, that's pretty much my media collection. And what it used to be was, whenever a sequel came out or a new installment to a new series, even if I didn't like it, I still bought it on Blu-ray or DVD just to have the entire series. The first time that I kind of stopped doing that was a while back when Terminator Genisys came out. I had such little regard for that film that I just flat out didn't buy it. I bought Salvation, and I really disliked that movie too, but I just thought, well, it's part of the series. But once I saw the kind of downward spiral of that series, I just said, it's silly to go out and spend $20 on a movie just to have it in my collection when I'm not going to watch it. Unfortunately, Star Wars has come to that point where I'm really buying these movies out of necessity. If I just bought the ones that I liked, I would have probably bought Force Awakens, and the rest of them I would have just caught on Disney Plus, because that's the funny thing. I have Disney Plus. All of these movies are available to stream, but I want the physical copies. And honestly, if The Mandalorian does come out on physical medium, I'll probably buy that too, because I really did enjoy that show. But this is probably the last Star Wars film I'll buy, just because, it's just silly to me to spend money on movies that I'm not going to watch. Even if it's in the same series, so what? Terminator, going back to that, the only really good films in that series, I agree with the majority on that, are the first 2 films. Terminator 3, I could leave it or take it. That was the last decent one. And after that, why should I spend the extra money? I think I own Salvation on DVD and Blu-ray. Maybe not. I don't know. But I know I own the original 3 movies on both. I double dib quite a bit. But there's a lot of news out there about this might be the last time we actually buy a Star Wars movie on physical media, because everything seems to be going digitally. Although from my understanding, because of how much space you have on Blu-rays and 4K Blu-rays, I guess, the quality of the movie, the image quality, is actually a lot better on the physical media than it is when you stream it. Even if you stream it on 4K, it's better to have the disc. I usually buy my movies at Best Buy. And I'm not a huge collector. I don't need to have the special steelbook. But with Star Wars, the last few, Force Awakens, Rogue One, and Last Jedi, I was able to buy the steelbook for. With Solo, the only way to buy the steelbook was to get the 4K version. Now, I own a 4K Blu-ray player. I own a 4K television. I have 3 movies that are on 4K Blu-ray. I think the only one where I have both Blu-ray and 4K is Mad Max Fury Road, because I have the Mad Max box set, and it came with both. And I've watched both the Blu-ray and the 4K, and I have a 4K television, and I didn't really notice the difference between the 4K and the Blu-ray. Very minimal. And my TV is, not super high end. It has very minimal HDR. So it's not like it's an expensive, like one of those OLED TVs that out of the box looks amazing. I couldn't really tell the difference. And also, my 4K Blu-ray player has a problem where it freezes and turns off by itself. It's really buggy, and I have taken it back once, and I got the same result with another one. So I just think that the specific player that I have does have a history of having issues. It's a Sony, by the way. I don't love Sony products, but Sony products tend to last a long time. So that's why I typically tend to buy Sony or something like that. Yeah, when I watch a 4K Blu-ray, the movie usually freezes a lot. Now, the sound on 4K Blu-ray sounds really good. I don't know how much better it is to the Blu-ray, but I'm not sold on 4K yet. And if you do your research, from what I understand, most movies, especially the big effects movies, are actually mastered in 2K, and then they upconvert them to 4K. Now, that's all technical stuff, but basically, I think if you own like a 50-inch 4K TV and you pop in a Blu-ray and then you go to pop in the 4K version of that movie, even though they advertise it as being 4 times the resolution of standard def, I don't notice the difference. It doesn't look, it's not, Blu-ray does look quite a bit better than DVD, but going from 4K to standard high def, I don't really notice the difference. You probably have to have like a 70-inch 4K TV to really notice the difference, and a really good one that, has really good HDR. Mine doesn't. So I'm not really sold on 4K. To spend the extra, I don't know, $15 for a 4K version of the movie, even if, to get the Steelbook, wasn't worth it to me, especially for a movie that I'm only going to watch once, didn't really care much for. I just own it because I wanted all 9 movies. Now I have all 9 movies. Am I going to go out and buy the big massive, it's like a 27 disc box set that's exclusive to Best Buy? No, I'm not spending $250. I have double dipped quite a bit, because the very first official copy of the Star Wars trilogy that I ever owned, I got in 1995 on VHS, and it was what they call now the Faces Collection, which has the faces of certain characters on each box. So Star Wars had Darth Vader, Empire had a Stormtrooper, Return of the Jedi had Yoda on the cover. That was the first official version of the movies I had. Then, of course, in 97, the special editions came out. If you're not, initiated, the special editions is where, for the 20th anniversary of the original film, they went in and added all these digital effects. It's a hotly debated topic in the Star Wars community. I didn't know at the time that they would release that on VHS. I just thought it was a theatrical experience. But no, they released it later that year on VHS, so that was my second copy. Then the movies came out on DVD, and that was a big deal because it took forever to release the original trilogy on DVD. I guess Lucas wasn't really sold on the technology yet. Eventually they did, and it was a big deal, and so I got the DVDs of it, and they looked great back then. And then throughout the years, they re-released the movies on DVD. Sometimes they had versions where they also released it with the unaltered theatrical versions. I didn't buy those because, it would be nice to see the originals. I'm not spending a bunch of extra money for it, though, so I skipped on those. Then the Blu-rays came out, and with the Blu-rays, that was the first time that all 6 movies in 2011, I believe, were together in one set, and I'd have them on Blu-ray, so I bought that. I was new to Blu-ray at the time, so I bought the 6 movies. And then I got, for some reason, really interested in antiques, if you will, and I went out and I went to eBay and I bought a Laserdisc player, and I bought the special editions as well as the original unaltered Star Wars trilogy on Laserdisc, this big massive box set that I've done videos on in the past. So I've double dipped quite a few times. The only reason I would have bought the massive discs, the whole Skywalker saga on Blu-ray, was if they had included like every special feature and everything. And there's quite a bit on there, but not enough to basically. I have the Blu-rays, I have the DVDs, so there's no special features that are exclusive to this big box set. I'm not sold on the 4K. Again, I don't need to see the movies on 4K, especially when the technology is kind of glitchy and they freeze a lot on my player at least. And there are, again, they added some stuff that I just don't care for. In the original, in A New Hope, they added some crap to the Greedo and Han Solo cantina scene again. That it's the version that's on Disney Plus, the McClunky version. I don't care to have that. I'm fine with the Blu-rays that I have, and that'll be it for me. I don't need them on 4K. So yeah, I'm not gonna double dip. I don't, 4K Blu-ray is just to me a gimmick to get people to buy all new equipment. It's just not there yet. Maybe one day when we all have 150-inch TVs and they have 20,000K, maybe then. But it just seems like everything is going streaming now because it's so much more convenient. With streaming, you don't have to wade through menus. You don't have to wade through, commercials and trailers until the movie starts. I bought Stranger Things actually had a physical media release on Blu-ray, and I own it. I love this release because it comes in a hard shell VHS case that's very retro for the 80s. Anybody who bought movies in the 80s or 90s, who rented movies at the local Blockbuster, would understand this packaging. And if you are a Stranger Things fan, you understand the reason. It's a very 80s centric show. I hate popping it in though because it's just chock full. It's got like 10 minutes of trailers that you can't skip. You can't even fast forward through them. It won't let you. You have to sit there and wade through these trailers every time you want to watch the disc. I hate that. I hate that so much. I believe it or not, I don't think this has that, but on the 4K Blu-ray, I kid you not, there was a feature on the 4K Blu-ray for Rise of Skywalker that said, "We actually have a feature where you can skip right to the movie." Hot shit, isn't that what you want to do in the first place? Even VHS had a fast forward button. You could fast forward through all that crap and go right to the movie. There are some Blu-rays that don't allow you to do that, I mean, it's cool if you want to see the new trailers and stuff, but have the option to skip it. So 4K Blu-ray is like, a small step forward and 50 steps back. I'm just not sold on the technology. As far as Rise of Skywalker goes, I don't know if I've given really my thoughts on it yet. It's a pretty subpar movie. Last Jedi I didn't think had anything interesting to say. I actually think it's a kind of a slog fest. Like I'm not that entertained by watching it. Now Last Jedi, there's not anything in it that's particularly bad. There's not like a bad scene. There's not like horrible writing, nothing like that. I even like the scenes on Canto Bight, which is that casino planet. I thought those were fine. The movie just didn't do much for me. I don't hate anything in the movie. It was just the one thing I'm a little annoyed by, and this might make me look bad, but Disney seems to be putting out this. It has to do with the Me Too movement, and I'm not against that movement by any means. I just feel that sometimes, all I'm going to say is sometimes it feels like there are certain aspects that get shoved in your face. You could tell Last Jedi was very much pro that movement. I'm not. It's not a problem for me. It just feels like sometimes that stuff gets forced down my throat. And in the middle of a science fiction movie like Star Wars, yeah, I don't know. I think they could have pulled back a little bit. It just felt like the male characters, especially Poe Dameron, was just getting emasculated the whole time by a predominant female cast. No problem with the female cast. That is great. You should have diversity. Have, Asians, have females, have, all kinds of people. Star Wars, Star Trek too. It's great to see all of these people represented. Have people from the LGBT community be represented. I am totally fine with that. It's just that sometimes it feels very didactic, meaning it feels like people are getting on a pedestal and kind of ramming this message down your throat. Force Awakens kind of did this too. When Rey and Finn first meet for the first time, Rey keeps telling Finn not to hold my hand. And it was so clear that they're just shoving that message down our throats. I get it. She's a strong female character. We didn't need Carrie Fisher in A New Hope saying that to Luke every 5 minutes. We just understood their characters. So, this is just a very weird time for me at least. I think for everybody, it's just very different. So anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. Aside from that, though, yeah, just Last Jedi just didn't do it for me. And I chalked it up. It's my least favorite Star Wars film, even now with Rise of Skywalker. But I just chalked it up to a film that's not for me. Because a lot of critics loved that movie. Loved it for being bold and different. I didn't think it was that different. I didn't think it really took the series in new directions. It surprised me. If you're going to do that, though, it has to be done well. You have to have a reason for it. And the decisions he made in that film didn't work for me. It let me down quite a bit. All of the times in that film where you thought something was going to happen and then he subverted expectations, the way he did it was not. It didn't amaze me or surprise me. It just kind of it annoyed me. So Rise of Skywalker, I was entertained by quite a bit of it, but I'm going to spoil this right now. So if you haven't seen the film yet and you still want to be surprised, stop the video, but I'm assuming you've seen the film. Once they revealed that Rey was a Palpatine, I checked out. It wasn't that I was like, this movie sucks, or I wasn't outraged. I just said at this point, it seems like they're really trying to do stuff to pander to the fans. Now, the one thing I will say about this Blu-ray, and I don't know if it's going to be streaming on Disney Plus, but the Skywalker Legacy documentary, it's a 2-hour documentary that doesn't just go behind the scenes of this movie. It juxtaposes it with behind the scenes footage from all the past films, especially the original trilogy. So they show like a Mark Hamill from 1980 doing lightsaber training, and then they'll cut back to I can't think of her name, the actress who plays Rey, Daisy Ridley. It'll cut to her doing the same things now. And so stuff like that is really cool. They have some really touching stuff where they talk about Carrie Fisher's passing, and then they show you footage of a young Carrie Fisher from like Empire Strikes Back talking in an interview, stuff like that. It's a really cool documentary. Again, though, strangely enough, something that annoyed me about the documentary, they didn't use the epic John Williams score. If you watch The Empire of Dreams, which is a great 2.5-hour documentary about the making of the original trilogy, they use John Williams' score. It feels like it's part of the Star Wars universe. For this, they use generic, like, sad music and generic dynamic music all throughout. It didn't even feel like a Star Wars documentary for a lot of it. But I digress. That's just a personal taste. That was a cool part of the documentary. And to hear J.J. Abrams talk about why he made the decisions. For example, I never liked the idea of having the Emperor come into this. I hated that. And I kind of was interested to see what they would do with Snoke. I hated what they did with him in The Last Jedi and the fact that he was actually a clone, I guess. But I'm against bringing back villains that have been killed off. To me, Return of the Jedi ended that story. I would have liked to see our characters go beyond and have to fight something different. That was a big problem for me in this new trilogy. The First Order is the Empire, and the Resistance, well, that's the Rebels. You're just renaming everything. We can't have it take place on Tatooine, so we have to call the desert planet Jakku now. But, I mean, that was something that I loved about the prequels, was that the environments, the worlds were so creative, and now, here we are 10 years, 15 years later, and we're back to deserts, forests, stuff that exists. You have all the technology to have these great, terrific worlds. I mean, I know we love the original trilogy, but we can celebrate some of the prequels too. Even if you don't like the prequels, come on, there are some positives to take away. Give us some of those epic worlds that, I want to be taken away to a faraway place. So that was something that bugged me about the whole trilogy. But to see how JJ thought that putting the Empire in here, the Emperor, would tie together all 9 films, and it's a story. He said something that's interesting, but I don't agree with it. He said that the Star Wars films are about Palpatines and Skywalkers. These films were never about Palpatine. Palpatine, I mean, we never even knew his name until the prequels came out. And, he was always the Emperor. He was always a villain. He was always a background character that we found out in the prequels was dictating how all this stuff went. But the characters we've been focusing on from 1 through 6, 1 through 8 really, were the Skywalkers. So I disagree with that. This is not a story about the Palpatines. So that's why it kind of threw me off that Rey is a Palpatine. And she's not even a direct descendant of Palpatine, because I guess her dad is a clone of Palpatine. So it's weird. It's weird. I didn't really like that. I didn't like the fact in Last Jedi, I gotta say the full name now, because Jedi used to just be Return of the Jedi. Now there's 2 movies with the word Jedi in it. So anyway, in Last Jedi, yeah, I wasn't big on the whole Rey comes from no one, because I don't feel that should be the message. I went into this new trilogy thinking this is going to be about Luke and Leia's offspring. Well, I was half right. Kylo Ren, Ben, is Leia's son. Okay. So technically it does that. But our main hero in this is not related to anybody, so we're led to believe. She's not. I really wanted her to be Luke's daughter. That's what I thought. And I would have been fine if they had just started Force Awakens giving us that information. But it was intriguing to figure out, well, who is she? I thought when she touched that lightsaber in Force Awakens and it called out to her, I really thought she was a Skywalker. It turns out she's a Palpatine. But the only reason I was okay with her being a nobody in Last Jedi was because I realized, well, it's only part of the real story. We're going to figure this out in 9. And she's not a nobody. She's the granddaughter of the greatest villain in the world, in the universe. So, but I was hoping that they would continue the stuff in Last Jedi, not make excuses for it and try to fix it. That's what this film kind of seemed to be doing. Now, I didn't feel that way when I first saw it. It does continue the story of Last Jedi. It's just that it's very obvious when watching this trilogy, there wasn't a clear vision. It's been said before, I don't want to kick a dead horse, but Rian Johnson took it in a different direction. And it seems like Kathleen Kennedy and whoever else was in charge, and I don't want to blame it all on her, but it seems like rather than sit down with JJ and some other, maybe even Lucas, and Bob Iger even, and sit down and stencil out a draft for where this story was going, she just said, JJ, write the story. Rian Johnson, write this story. Do what you need to do, and we'll fix it as we go along. And then they brought JJ back, and that's one of the problems with Rise of Skywalker. I don't know if he says he isn't. Maybe he's not trying to erase everything Rian Johnson did, but JJ started something with Force Awakens. Now he's coming back and trying to continue his story rather than continuing Rian Johnson's story, and that's why this movie feels like it should have been 2 movies. There are a lot of ideas that felt like it was like he was saying, this is what I had planned for 8. I didn't get to do that, so I'm going to try to squeeze it in here. Again, there's so much going on in this movie that it's just so hard to keep track of. I've gone through this before, but I guess so basically I thought this was okay. It was serviceable. It was disappointing as a send-off for 9 movies, but I would like to one day sit down, as they are meant to be, and watch all 9 movies. Not in one sitting, but in like a 3 or 4 day marathon. Maybe watch them all and just see how it plays out. We'll do a trilogy a day. How's that? I'm strictly going based on this and my reaction to Last Jedi. I've only seen this movie, I think, twice. Really, once full. I kind of watched this in passing as I was doing work around the house. But, yeah, it was okay. One of my least favorites. The last thing I can really do is rank the Star Wars films, which is really hard to do because there are some films, there's varying different levels of quality for these, but it's really hard for me to put certain films ahead of other films. This might be blasphemy, but this is the way that I rank these films. For me, there are 5 levels of distinct quality when it comes to Star Wars films. So instead of saying this is the highest rank, this is the next, there are certain films in this saga that just belong on the same level of tier for some reason. So that's how I rank these films. So that's how I'm going to do this. So real quick, the top tier Star Wars for me, the best Star Wars has ever been, and every movie in this series tries to compete with these films. For me, Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi are at the top of my list. Technically, I like Return of the Jedi the best because, Star Wars A New Hope was kind of an experimental film for Lucas. They were trying out new things. Empire advanced the effects a little bit while telling a much better story. And Jedi concludes that story, but there's so much going on in that film in a good way. Visually, the storytelling, the emotional impact. I think the only reason people might be turned off by that film maybe are the special edition changes, which for the most part, I like most of the stuff that they added. That's just my taste. And secondly, I think maybe because there was a lot of, the Ewoks, there was a lot of puppets in Return of the Jedi that made it more kid-friendly. Again, I like that stuff. That's not a turnoff to me. I like the extended Jedi Rocks dance number with the Max Rebo band. I'm fine with that. So that's my preference. But aside from all that stuff, they just go hand in hand. Empire and Jedi they just feel like one big movie. It feels like they're continuing. Like A New Hope can stand by itself as a film; it's a self-contained movie. Empire and Jedi are two pieces of one whole, and it tells that story very well. And it feels like a very fitting conclusion to not just the trilogy, but the first 6 movies. To me, Return of the Jedi is where the story really ends. So I love those movies; those are great. The tier below that is Revenge of the Sith. I know a lot of people are like, well, it's okay, it's terrible, it's a prequel, so it doesn't matter. First of all, considering that this was the last movie that George Lucas directed, it was a very strong one to go out on. Secondly, episodes 1 and 2 had a lot of glaring flaws. Revenge of the Sith polished that up. Some of these films I just look at as the highs versus the lows. With Empire and Jedi, it was basically almost perfect films for the most part. It was just great storytelling. A lot of highs, no lows, I don't know, every scene in those movies, to me, is entertaining and always will be. There's something nostalgic about them. Revenge of the Sith, there are some lows, but mostly very high highs, higher than I've ever seen. There are so many great moments in that film. Basically everything dealing with Anakin conversing with Palpatine, Obi-Wan, Ewan McGregor, top of his game. There are just some little scenes in there where Palpatine's telling Anakin about Darth Plagueis. That's a popular one. Where Obi-Wan confronts Padme and says he knows that Anakin's the father, and he says, "I'm so very sorry," and walks off knowing that he's got to kill Anakin. Probably the most powerful scene in the entire saga, in my opinion. I love that movie, and you're not going to convince me otherwise. There are a couple of bad scenes, but they're just a couple in a 2.5-hour movie of mostly greatness. So the third tier below that is kind of interesting. For me, it's A New Hope and The Force Awakens. It seems pretty obvious to me because The Force Awakens borrows quite a bit from A New Hope's formula and story. But I would say they are both just as entertaining. They both set up their respective trilogies. They both introduce very interesting characters in fresh ways. I felt The Force Awakens was fresh enough. It did enough fresh things. It used the same template, but it did a lot of really cool things with the characters. The fact that Finn was a stormtrooper who started out evil and right away decided to abandon the Empire to go work with the good guys. I really loved that. Poe Dameron was a really dynamic character that I wish we would have gotten to see more of throughout the trilogy. Or at least I would have liked to see him interact with Finn more, because that's what they set up originally. They're just very entertaining films. I get challenged on this all the time because a lot of people are like, you actually think that J.J. Abrams made a better film than Lucas? I think Force Awakens is as entertaining as A New Hope. The pacing in both seems about the same. There are some pacing issues with A New Hope, as there are with Force Awakens for sure. But when it takes off, both films really take off in very different ways. It's hard to say, but I don't think that's a fair argument to compare Lucas to Abrams because they've both had good films and bad films in their library. If you want to defend Lucas, and keep in mind, Lucas is my favorite filmmaker of all time. He just is, for Star Wars and for everything else he's contributed to the filmmaking industry. But he made the prequels, and a lot of people hated those films. So comparing that to, do you think Lucas made or JJ made a better film than Lucas? I think they're on par. I think they're just as enjoyable. On the fourth tier, and this is where it gets kind of the fourth tier of Star Wars for me, where the quality really starts to dip. Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Rise of Skywalker. All of them have a couple of highs. Rise of Skywalker really doesn't have a ton of stuff that stands out to me. The stuff at the beginning where Poe is like space jumping or warp speed skipping, I actually liked that. I thought that was a fun scene. But there's not a ton of highs in it. Not a ton of lows. I just felt it was kind of a dumb movie for me. And that's kind of Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, kind of the same level. They all have flaws, but they're all watchable. I enjoy watching all of them. With the Phantom Menace, the storyline suffers quite a bit, but I also feel the effects in that movie actually do hold up. There's nothing about the writing in that movie that's particularly bad. It's more the acting in that one. The acting is very stiff, and how you get a bad performance out of Liam Neeson, I don't know. It's just not there. He doesn't seem very invested in the character. No one really does in that film. Attack of the Clones. The action scenes in that movie are great. I like all the action scenes. Special effects visually have not aged, and the dialogue in that movie can be atrocious. That's all I'm going to say about it. I still enjoy watching about 2/3 of that movie. The stuff with Anakin and Padme, painful. And then again, The Rise of Skywalker, it's a fun movie. It's a dumb movie. It's a fun blockbuster. Don't think too much about it. That's all I can really say. And then 5th tier for me, Last Jedi. I know it was critically acclaimed. Some people compare it to Mad Max Fury Road. I don't know. Maybe. This isn't Mad Max. This is Star Wars. It's got an 8 in the title. The only other movie that has a number that high in its title is Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. So maybe this should have been called Star Wars Episode 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. I don't know. But I just didn't enjoy that film. Again, it didn't have some of the lows that like Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones had. Nothing specifically bad. It just didn't take it in a good direction for me. That movie ended and I was scratching my head. Didn't enjoy it that much. Not one I'll really watch again. Same with Rise of Skywalker. But those are just my thoughts. Sorry for the long video. I have nothing else better to do. I spent the last 3 days ripping up carpet in my room, and I figured, hell, I'll put out a video. I mean, shit. The kind of times we live in now are kind of creepy, you know? Anyway, those are my thoughts. Probably the last Star Wars film I'll buy on physical media, unless some of the ones down the road are good, you know? Mandalorian doesn't count because it's a TV show. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and, stay inside and clean yourselves daily. Bye.